and welcome to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga. Welcome you into the show. Happy first day of April. I'm begging for some warm weather finally over here in Morgantown, West Virginia, where I'm live doing this show. But anyway, I have a lot of good stuff planned for you guys here today on today's episode around the NFL and a lot more interesting topics to talk about. Starting off with Haason Reddick and the trade that sent him to the New York Jets in exchange for a conditional pick. I'll get into that and breaking all that down to start the show. Later on, we're going to talk about Brandon Ayuk's contract situation a bit more and what he said about it and where he feels his value is to the San Francisco 49ers. As well, in the second half of the show, for the first time on this show, I'm going to be breaking the last two segments into one big segment, ranking the NFC Conference and the AFC Conference from 1 to 16 to make it more room for analysis and breaking down why I'm ranking the teams as I am, 1 to 16, and just going over how each of them have improved after the first month of free agency. So a lot to talk about on today's episode. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And one last time before I start with the first segment, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions, comments to make during this live show, to use the tip and donations link on your screen and running across the ticker down below, gsmcpodcast.net. This just makes sure I'm able to see your question, I can read it on air and interact with you guys, make it more conversational. It's a lot more fun for me, I think, a lot better for the show. It's a big help for this show as well as every other show on the network. We always show great appreciation to you guys every time anyone's able to do that with any questions that you guys may have. But starting off the show, like I mentioned, with the Haason Reddick trade to the New York Jets, a pretty big trade. We had been talking about it in weeks leading up to it. I mentioned today was the deadline for that roster bonus that Haason Reddick was due with the Philadelphia Eagles. So I pointed out to today being almost a made-up deadline for the Philadelphia Eagles if they were going to get something done or just ride out that final year of Haason Reddick's contract. They decided the latter. And in the trade that sent Haason Reddick to the New York Jets, it was a pretty straight-up trade, not too complicated. The New York Jets sent the Eagles a 2026 third-round pick, a conditional third-round pick that could become a second-round pick if Haason Reddick plays at least 67% of the snaps this season and has 10 or more sacks as well this season. And obviously the Jets just get Haason Reddick in return. Pretty interesting just from that because usually the conditional trades are mainly just playing time from the main details that you get when the trade is being announced. 10 or more sacks is pretty interesting because that's already a great season for Haason Reddick for the New York Jets if he were to get that this season. And just based off of his history, this past year was a bit of a down year for Reddick, but in years leading up to last year, he was very, very impressive with the Philadelphia Eagles. One of their best defensive players, if not the best, just based on that first or second year that he played there. Very impactful on the defensive line. Now the Jets get a very experienced and successful pass rusher for their defensive line, which transitions now into this idea of the New York Jets and really going in on this season. One of the reasons they got Haason Reddick to really round off that defense, other than pass rusher, which they now obviously attacked and addressed this with this trade, they only really need to address safety, maybe corner on that defensive side of the ball, maybe just get other depth pieces elsewhere. But other than that, it's really hard to find a massive, massive glaring issue for the New York Jets. And really just them building around this idea of no excuses, going all in on this season with Aaron Rodgers. Hopefully they get him healthy for the majority of the season after coming off of that Achilles injury. But now, like I mentioned, it's almost no excuses for the New York Jets. They have almost everything that you would need to compete in a very competitive AFC, in a division where it's looking a bit inconsistent to some degree because of the Dolphins, probably the best team in that division, but they showed weaknesses and most of their flaws in the playoffs when it got colder, playing in cold environments, that inexperience to some extent as well with Tua. Then you have the Patriots that have made some decent moves this offseason, but you don't really believe that they have the talent and level on their roster right now, as it stands today on April 1st, to compete with the Bills, the Jets, and the Dolphins. And on that note, it's the Buffalo Bills who are left, and they obviously have Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs. James Cook looked promising last year. Dalton Kincaid had a breakout year in his first year. But then again, they've lost Jordan Poyer, Tre'Davious White, Gabe Davis is now gone. So how is that all going to affect how they look offensively and defensively and in the locker room as well? Because those guys were big locker room leaders, impactful voices in that locker room. Apart from the coaches, those guys were the main leaders. So you have to put into effect or determine how much of an effect those guys' departure will affect the chemistry and how this team really gets together towards the beginning of this season. But overall, it looks like the Jets right now just seem to be breaking positive news after positive news. And with the addition of Haason Reddick, it was reported before by Mike Garafolo that it was believed that Haason Reddick was pushing or was going to be pushing for a bigger contract after his current contract expires after this season in 2024. So it didn't look like the Eagles wanted to commit a lot of money to him. Plus, with the signing of Bryce Huff from the New York Jets, it didn't look like they were going to have really enough money to pay Bryce Huff, Josh Sweat, Haason Reddick, all of this money to really play in the same position. So it made the most sense for the Eagles to trade him, and they got the best out of it. Basically a switch. Bryce Huff goes to the Eagles, and Haason Reddick goes to the New York Jets. And just from that point, seeing how that broke down with the contract, I mentioned he's on the last year of his contract, Haason Reddick. He wants an extension. Nothing's really being talked about right now or reported, but unlike the Cleveland Browns, I think the Jets are wise not to really negotiate something right now, because I'm just always of that mindset that you have to see what he can give you. He's only 29 years old. He's coming off of a mid-season, not really showing his best potential, but you have seen it before. It is in him in that run when they made the Super Bowl, so you have seen flashes of it, but you have to make sure it's still there if you're the New York Jets. With so much that you've invested into this team right now, it wouldn't make sense to me to give him an extension right away like the Broncos did with Russell Wilson, like the Browns did with Jerry Jeudy. Obviously, with Russell Wilson, the money was exponential and so much money just being talked about. Haason Reddick isn't the same amount of money, but I'm just still of that mindset that he has to go and earn it. So he is in a contract year, so that could be more motivation to benefit the New York Jets going forward. And now, the New York Jets, like I mentioned, looking all good, all positive on their side. They've done everything well so far this offseason. Then you look at the Eagles. Not that they're doing bad, but they're almost trending in a different direction just because they're eliminating a lot of the players that they played last season. They've released or just moved on from 21 players who started at least one game for them already this offseason. You look at that and you think, oh, wow, like 21 players, that's a lot. They haven't brought in 21 players to replace them. How are they going to look? But most of those players either didn't play well or retired or just really weren't like star potential players that are going to be a devastating loss for them. So it's almost good that they got rid of right away some of the guys that didn't cut it for them, didn't perform to the level they thought. And just clearing house isn't always a bad thing if you lose this amount of players. Specifically talking about the pass rushers, I mentioned Bryce Huff replaces Haason Reddick. Josh Sweat was able to remain with the Eagles because he had some contract disputes for a bit, but he ultimately decided to restructure his deal, and he was going to stay because he restructured his deal. It was less money for the Eagles. Unlike Haason Reddick, he stays. And now those two are your presumed starters for the Eagles. Something to keep note with Bryce Huff and him being the really presumed leader, presumed starter right now for the Philadelphia Eagles. With the breakout year coming last year, he had 10 sacks. He signed a 3-year, $51 million deal with the Eagles. He's still only 26 years old, so you're hoping to get a lot more of those kind of years going forward. But this is a major uptick in usage for Bryce Huff. Last year, Reddick and Sweat played over 800 snaps as the starters last year, and Bryce Huff had a career year last year where his max amount of snaps were only 480. So how much is really double of what he played last year going to affect them heading into this season? I say that because if you're not getting the ultimate best out of those two guys, who's behind them, who can spot them for a rep or two and give you the same amount of output? You have the young rookie out of Georgia, Nolan Smith, who remains on the roster, and Howie Roseman and other organization members for the Eagles have said that they want to play him more. They really didn't like how it played out last year in his rookie season, not really using him. He only played about 16% of the entire snaps of the regular season, so they want to get more out of him. But how much do you think you're going to get out of him now in his second year when he really didn't play and he really didn't get any experience reps with the Eagles, and something to build on heading into this year where he'll be needed a lot more for that depth to spot Bryce Huff and Josh Sweat. And also, just to add on to that, Josh Sweat was the starter, but unfortunately he only finished with 6.5 sacks last year, which is okay, but he didn't manage a single sack in any of the last 8 games to end the season, which is why the defensive struggles were so magnified. They weren't getting any pressure. The secondary suffered because of that, and it looked just a lot worse week to week in some of the bad losses that they have, ending all with Tampa Bay and the kind of loss that they had there. So all of that now plays into effect this year. Yeah, they got some good compensation for Haason Reddick, more than I thought they were going to get, honestly. For a second-round pick, what could be a second-round pick, I think that's very well done for the Philadelphia Eagles and how they managed to do that. But there still remains questions. I'm still skeptical over all the stuff that I mentioned just there. Better off after the trade, the winners of this trade. Short term, I just think it's the Jets because you're more confident in what you're going to get out of Haason Reddick. You've seen it. He's proven it more often than Bryce Huff has in just this 1 year where he broke out, had 10 sacks, earned his contract, but now there's more expectations to build on that, to continue to play on that. And like I mentioned, Haason Reddick has been to the Super Bowl with the Eagles, has put up some big numbers. I think the most he had was 16.5 sacks just a few years ago. So the Jets are getting that to add on to this roster that's ready to win now. Immediate production from all their assets that they gained this offseason. I think the Jets right now are the major winners of this trade. And to wrap up this segment, the depth behind the pass rushers for the Eagles, it's important. Hopefully for them, they get the most out of Nolan Smith and just anybody else they might fortify their defensive line with in the draft or the rest of this offseason. But you have guys like Jalen Carter that showed great potential. He was a monster for them in the middle of that defensive line last year, so you hope also for that potential growth and jump out of Jalen Carter. But if you notice a trend, I'm saying hope, anticipate, maybe with the Philadelphia Eagles. It's a big question mark right now with them and how this will play out. It could go well, but the uncertainty and the unknown right now is what makes this move a lot more successful for the Jets because they are more likely to see production out of guys that, have had production in the NFL already. So that's where that stands. A big trade nonetheless because of it involves a pass rusher still in the prime age of his career at 29. Haason Reddick will be a great addition for the New York Jets. And really, they're pushing for contender status in the AFC, which they're going to need because it is a very competitive conference, and it will be very interesting how it all plays out for the New York Jets if they all stay healthy. But in the meantime, we're going to continue on with the show. I'm going to talk about Brandon Ayuk and his contract situation with the San Francisco 49ers, what he said on it, and how that will affect not only his contract, but the dynamic of this team going forward with all the negotiations and their salary cap situation they might find themselves in down the line. A lot more coming up on the show today. The GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. More on that story and others after this break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on their fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Back here on the show to continue talking about more stories, contract negotiations around the NFL. Specifically now on Brandon Ayuk and how his situation is sort of developing right now as I speak. We've seen a lot of antics, a lot of stories, stuff like that at hinting at where this could go. Ayuk tweeting at Mike Tomlin, getting all the Steelers fans excited for a potential trade. The Steelers are in the market for a wide receiver. The Instagram story he posted after John Lynch spoke on the contract negotiations very positively, but if you saw his story, you would think the opposite, and him calling out John Lynch in that story, however you want to interpret it, there was that. And now Ayuk most recently went on the Nightcap Show podcast for Shannon Sharp and Chad Ochocinco. He was a guest on that show, and he went on there to talk about it. He is on the final year of his contract this year, 2024, and they asked him about it, what was going on with it, to which he said, "I'm trying to get what I deserve. I feel like this season playing football, I figured out who I was as a person and a player, what I bring to the table, what I bring to the locker room, what I bring to the organization." Very confidently said in the show. If you didn't see it, I recommend go watching it. It's a very entertaining show. This episode spoke a lot of how Brandon Ayuk felt during his contract negotiations going on, and you do see the way he speaks of it, how you could agree with him, because if you saw any of the 49ers games last year, how he developed and grew throughout the season, all 17 weeks, and even in the playoffs, you saw how impactful he was, not only because of the production. He led the 49ers with 75 receptions. He had a career high of over 1,300 yards, 17.9 yards per catch, another season high or career high for him. And he had 7 touchdowns as well. He not only put up those numbers, which are very impressive for any receiver on any team. He would start on any team most likely. But he was pretty much healthy the whole season. And that's something I think a lot of people don't really value too highly. A lot of people just look at the stats and the production and stuff like that. The consistency is important in these statistical categories of production, but health and being always there for the team, always having Brock Purdy look over and know what he's going to get out of Brandon Ayuk, that is just as important, I think, for any team, any successful team. And the 49ers have had that with Ayuk, which is why you always see them in NFC Championship games, always making the playoffs, always having really that number 1 or number 2 seed, just coming off of a Super Bowl. That's the kind of stuff you need out there. I'm not throwing shade on Debo or McCaffrey or George Kittle, but if you compared all of them with Brandon Ayuk's usually the one that's always out there compared to George Kittle, Debo, and McCaffrey, like I mentioned. All of them almost always pick up a knock here or there. It's not really too significant, but just comparing them to Ayuk, he's always out there, so that's a positive. On the final year of his deal, like I mentioned, he is set to make $14 million. And if you compare that to Debo or really any wide receiver in the league, the kind of receivers that put up the kind of numbers that Ayuk just did, Debo is set to make almost $24 million, which is the threshold right now for some of the best wide receivers. I would say 24 to 28 range, 20 to 28 range, I would probably say for those top 15, top 10 receivers that I think Ayuk falls into. You start getting above the 27s to 28s. That's when you get into top 3, top 5 receivers in the NFL. Definitely, that's what Tyreek Hill makes, Devontae Adams makes, to name a few, Cooper Kupp. I don't think Brandon Ayuk's there yet, but being paid $14 million next season isn't an indication of how much he brings to this team. So there's that. And I mentioned that because this financial salary cap issues with the 49ers and how this could really get a bit bigger now is because they've struck gold, obviously, with Brock Purdy and how low his contract situation is and how low his salary is, really. He will only be a $1 million cap hit next season on his rookie deal still. And their CEO, Jed York, has already said, I talked about it last week, how they know what they have in Brock Purdy. They're excited to have him on their team. They know he's going to cost a lot, but that's a good problem to have one of the top quarterbacks, young quarterbacks in the league. They're open to extending him. They don't seem hesitant to give him the sort of money that he might ask for, over $40 million per year. We don't know. That's next season, but you kind of presume that's the amount he'll want to ask for if he performs like he did last year. So you have a big contract coming up next season with Brock Purdy. Not to mention, as of right now, the 49ers are projected to be $24 million over the cap in 2025. So you have your quarterback. No one's arguing. If you had to make a decision, are you going to stick with a top quarterback or one of the top wide receivers on your team? Most, if not all people, are going to stick with the quarterback. So if it does come down to next season trying to re-sign Brandon Ayuk when he'll be a free agent, or giving Brock Purdy this big deal if he performs like he did this season, Brandon Ayuk's going to go regardless. So instead of losing him for basically nothing next season, getting one more year out of him, it will be important how that plays out with Purdy. And now it could be a consideration for the 49ers to try and get something done for Ayuk. If things are going as stale and as negative, I guess, I don't want to say negative because John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan have been pretty adamant about it. Ayuk hasn't really said it's been bad, but he hasn't said it's good either. So right now they're in a weird area, gray area, where nothing's really getting done. They're just talking, reportedly, according to Shanahan and John Lynch. You have to really start thinking and considering your options with Ayuk. Right now, selling him high when his market value is at an all-time high just based on the season, like I mentioned, that he had, and the sort of situations you're going to be in next season with Brock Purdy. I don't know any of the other contracts that they might have due, but they're already over the cap, and regardless, they're going to have some free agents. I'm sure they're going to have some significant player on the last year of their deal or trying to restructure something. You don't want to add on Brandon Ayuk and trying to add him or re-sign him and potentially losing him for nothing. So right now, I think it's sort of trending in a way where the 49ers will stay on their stance and say, yeah, we're going to negotiate with them. It's going well. It's not going bad, so we're just going to keep talking. They're going to go with that until, really, I think, that it's getting closer to the draft, and we're going to maybe see a situation like A.J. Brown a few years ago with the Philadelphia Eagles. He wanted a contract extension. They couldn't agree on anything. And the Titans really just decided, hey, we're not going to lose this all-world receiver for free. Let's trade him during the NFL draft to the Eagles. I'm pretty sure they got a second-round pick out of it and maybe something else. So if that's the get back compared to getting nothing for him, I think the 49ers are starting to trend that way, and it might be the ultimate solution to try and keep most of their players that they have on this roster. Like I mentioned, I don't know how many or how significant the players they will have next offseason be free agents, but you'd rather have more money to distribute to a lot players than paying Ayuk right now, something that you might not be comfortable with, then having to pay Brock Purdy next offseason. Then you're really in a cap deficit, and you don't have money to pay the rest of the players that you might have as free agents or trying to get contract extensions as well. And on that note, the longer this waits out, you have to think. I mentioned other wide receivers that need extensions: Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb. Most people will have them above Brandon Ayuk in terms of wide receiver rankings, hierarchy in the league. If they wait any longer, I don't know how much longer before Justin Jefferson gets a new deal or CeeDee Lamb gets a new deal, but they're very high quality players. The Cowboys and Vikings will want to get deals done with them. The longer the 49ers put this off and say they don't agree on a contract with Ayuk until after Justin Jefferson gets a new contract, CeeDee Lamb gets a new contract, this is only going to raise the price even more by resetting the market, which Justin Jefferson has said he wants to do, pushing that average salary per year past $30 million. It's only going to raise the price for Brandon Ayuk even more, so they have to consider that. And the last thing I'll say is Mike Garafolo, again, reported on Friday, this past Friday, that both sides aren't really close to a new deal. You want to talk about circumstances of that. Will Brandon Ayuk sit out? Will he play on the low wages that I mentioned before? I don't think he'll sit out, because if he sits out, the daily fine for missing training camp and preseason games is $40,000 for training camp and $784,000 a game check for preseason games. So, it's too expensive to sit out if you're Brandon Ayuk at this point. I think the best situation for Brandon Ayuk and the 49ers is trending in that we're going to see something gain more traction as we head into the NFL draft. The 49ers have a good chance right now of cashing in on Brandon Ayuk at the draft for someone picking late or someone past the 20s in the mid-round to try and get something for him. I would say second round, but if you could get something in the first day and get a first-round pick or not have to rush on that second day to get a second-round pick at least for him, I think would work out better in the end for both parties if it went out that way. And, the 49ers have already lost Eric Armstead. Could this be one of the last years you see this core group of guys, the Ayuks, the McCaffreys, the Debos, Bosa, George Kittle, really all together? Once and if they lose Ayuk, it could start to trend a bit more negative just because, like I mentioned, that salary cap situation they find themselves in. Brock Purdy getting a lot of money, how much more would that push them into a deficit? I don't want to predict it now, but it's something to watch going forward, Could this be one of the last years we see the 49ers with that same core group of guys that they've been able to hold on to for so long, be successful for so long? But much like the Buffalo Bills, those great teams have a window. I'm not saying it's closed. I'm not saying by any means it's closed or it's close to being closed, but it's just something to look at. Thinking about it, how this money thing plays out, potentially losing Ayuk, trying to be lucky enough to replace him. It's a lot harder than it seems for these teams, so it's something to watch, something to keep an eye on. It's definitely, something's going to happen at the NFL draft. I'm already predicting that if this doesn't get any better, the NFL draft is where usually some of the biggest deals happen, and I wouldn't be surprised if Ayuk is traded in the first day of the NFL draft. So watch that. Make sure maybe he'll be drafted to one of your favorite teams out there. Who knows? But yeah, something interesting to monitor going now into the month of April. It's draft month, so things are just going to ramp up from here. It's talking about this show, ramping up this show. We're going to send it into the second break of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. A lot more to get into on today's episode. I'm going to bring you my power rankings for each conference after the break. A lot of surprises in there, a lot of expected rankings. Find out how I've ranked the AFC Conference and the NFC Conference coming up after this break. You're watching the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Getting back to the conversation around football, and a lot of times during the offseason we get into the rankings. A lot of these teams changed. A lot of their foundation and star players have changed. Already we've seen a lot of that this offseason. It's been one of the more crazier off seasons that I've seen just in my time following the NFL extensively. So I've decided to bring you guys a power rankings. I'm splitting it up into conferences just because of the length of each segment and wanting to explain my picks for these rankings. So the first segment is going to be based on the NFC, ranking them from 16 to 1st. And then in the last segment, stick around to find out the AFC rankings. So that being said, or actually before I get into the NFC rankings one last time, please remember, if you want to have a question, ask me a question, make a comment during today's live show, use the tip and donations link on the screen right now at gsmcpodcast.net with any questions. The power rankings, I'm sure, will bring a lot of questions and comments to the show. So if you want to say anything, use that tip and donations link to have your question pop up here in my chat box. I can read it out loud during the live show, have a conversation, make it more interactive. It's always better when you guys are able to do that, and it's always a big help, and we appreciate it every time you guys are able to use the link, once again, at gsmcpodcast.net. But now, finally, the power rankings, starting with the AFC, or NFC, I should say, starting from 16, I have the Carolina Panthers. No real surprise there. They have been trending positively. They added Deontay Johnson, added Robert Hunt on the offensive line. Have some pieces there. You want to believe in the potential of Bryce Young as a first overall pick, so they still have that. Dave Canales comes over from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They had a good season offensively. So all of that could mean more positives, at least in the development of Bryce Young. But, they finished doing 15 last year. They have a lot of new in this season, so that usually doesn't lead to immediate success, especially with a young team that they have. They're ranked 16. I don't think a lot of people have issues with that. Moving on to 15, the Arizona Cardinals added Mack Wilson in the offseason, Jonah Williams to help that offensive line. No real wide receivers on the roster right now because of the trade with Marquise Brown, or actually signing Marquise Brown. The Chiefs did from free agency. The Cardinals lost him. They didn't re-sign him. So they really don't have a great wide receiver. You think of the receivers that they had, Larry Fitzgerald, DeAndre Hopkins at one point more recently. They've always had one, And now you look around their roster, they don't have that eye-popping talent that brings in attention. On defense, they have Kaiser White, Buda Baker, players like that, but you need someone on offense to have any sort of chance in an NFC, especially their division that's very competitive. So they need to bolster their offense a lot more. James Conner's a nice piece. Obviously, Kyler Murray played very well to end the season, so that's positive, but they need a receiver. Lucky enough for them, they're picking number 4. So if they decide to trade it or take a Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, they really don't lose whichever the decision they take. They're in a decent spot, but last year 4-13, they need a couple more pieces other than a receiver, so not really looking great this season, but I like the way they're trending. They're going to be 15. Moving on to 14, I have the New York Giants. They lost a lot. I've been on the Giants hate bandwagon a lot. It might seem recently with how I talked about them losing Saquon, Xavier McKinney, but positively they added Brian Burns. John Runyon is a big one, I think. He's a great offensive line player for the Packers, and he's still very young. To sign him was huge to finally try and solve that offensive line problem that they have. They brought in Devin Singletary. I'm not going to say he replaces Saquon, but they have him on the roster now to at least fill that running back hole that they have instead of having nobody. But you talk about, again, you look at those big losses. Saquon, one of the best, if not the best running back in the league. Xavier McKinney, a very young, good, promising, free safety, whatever you want to call him. He's now on the Packers. They didn't re-sign him. On offense, just a lack of proven weapons that you can rely on for Daniel Jones, who is, again, another expensive question mark that fans and analysts want to have about him. So a lot of question marks, a big year for Brian Dable and general manager Joe Shane. They're picking 6, so that could help a little bit, potentially trade that, get more pieces, or get a franchise quarterback to get people to buy in to something exciting and new. A lot of options for them, but the losses are more significant. They're going to be the 3rd worst team in the NFL and the NFC. Moving on to the Commanders, sticking in the NFC East. I like the pieces that they added, a lot of them on the defensive side of the ball. New head coach, new general manager. The biggest thing is no quarterback. They're picking number 2, so you expect it to be a quarterback. No pass rushers either, really, on that defensive line, so that's something they could add. They added Dante Fowler, but you need a star really at that position like most of the best teams do. They need to still add some pieces. They were 4-13 last year in a division that's normally very competitive, but I think they've done a lot to kind of push past that threshold and compete more closely than I think a lot of people will give them credit for this season with the Eagles, definitely with the Cowboys, and maybe finally they'll beat the Giants this year. So they have all the pieces around them, but they just need that quarterback. So right now they'll stick at 13, but I liked what they did so far in this offseason. Then we have the Chicago Bears. A very good job by Ryan Poles, in my opinion, this free agency and through trades, trading Justin Fields, getting Keenan Allen, bringing in DeAndre Swift, Gerald Everett from the Los Angeles Chargers. I think they've done a good job fortifying that offense, but questions around their offensive line. They could get help at number 9 if they choose to do that. How would it all play out? Really with Caleb Williams, because you expect him to go number 1 at this point. How will it all fit together and mesh, and how will all these pieces really gain chemistry together? That's still the biggest question mark. Matt Eberflus is a defensive coach, so how will he really help the development of Caleb Williams and this talented offense? Those sort of questions, big questions, have them ranked at number 12. Moving into 11, I have the Minnesota Vikings. Good free agents on defense, good additions on the defensive side of the ball. Aaron Jones is big for them, adds a good star running back to that offense to complement Justin Jefferson. TJ Hawkinson is one of the best tight ends in my opinion. They have to figure out still the contract situation with Justin Jefferson, But other than that, this offense is very talented. Jordan Addison is a very talented young receiver. I mentioned the defense, adding Jonathan Grenard, Alex Van Ginkel, some of the pieces that were solid starting pieces on other teams, contending teams in the playoffs. So adding them, I think it's great. They just need a quarterback. If they trade up, that would be great for them. But how much are you giving up? Still some big questions. You don't hope they lose Justin Jefferson, but that's still a possibility. They're ranked at number 11. Moving into now the top 10. It got kind of dicey from here. I had some issues ranking them, but at number 10, I have the New Orleans Saints. Good players still. They have Derek Carr, average, good starting quarterback. Chris Olave is a great player that they drafted. Their defense is still good. The thing about them is that, it's starting to age a little bit. Demario Davis is still playing, one of their best players on defense. They have Tyrann Mathieu, Marshawn Lattimore. They have a reputation of being a tough, competitive team. It just seems they're always in salary cap issues and problems. It's going to come back to bite them at some point. They haven't really added major additions to this team, so they're kind of teetering around at the midpoint. I'm going to give them 10. Number 9 is the Seattle Seahawks. I love the hire of Mike McDonald from the Baltimore Ravens to bring to life that defense a little bit more. They added Jerome Baker on that side of the ball. Hankins as well. They still just have questions around their quarterback. Is Geno Smith really that long-term option? Edge rushers, they don't really have too many. And offensive line, their general manager has said is the big glaring issue. So there's still a lot of question marks around them, but they always still seem to be in competitive games. In games with the 49ers, the Rams, the Eagles last year, they beat the Eagles. So they always also have just a reputation of playing up to the level of competition. I have them ranked at number 9. Number 8, one of the revolutions of this free agency, the Atlanta Falcons. Raheem Morris, I'm glad to see he finally got an opportunity as an official head coach. He was the interim head coach with the Falcons before. Now he's the official new head coach. Kirk Cousins, obviously, is the big one. Darnell Mooney is another underrated signing. They just desperately need defensive help. They have no pass rushers at all to rush, bring any sort of trouble to the opposing quarterbacks. Their secondaries are all right with Jesse Bates and A.J. Terrell, but they need to address that most likely in the draft, hopefully in free agency. If they do that, they're going to be very competitive, but because of that, I still have them ranked as the 8th best team in the NFC. 7 is the Dallas Cowboys. Questionable, maybe they should be higher. I don't think so because I've just been on them for losing so many pieces and not adding anybody to compensate for those big losses that they have on the defensive side of the ball, where they struggled majorly last year. They lost all their players last year that they had last year, and now they expect still to be in a similar situation. I don't see it. They have issues with Dak Prescott's contract. CeeDee Lamb needs an extension. Micah Parsons will need an extension eventually. They're ranked as number 7. They're on the decline for me. Number 6, I got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They got most of their major players back. Another year under Todd Bowles, and with that core group of guys, they surprised a lot of people last year. I think they're only going to build on that. Baker seemed to finally turn that corner and be one of the top 12, 15 quarterbacks in the league. Godwin, Evans, you know what you're going to get out of them. I have them ranked as the 6th best team. Then you get into the top 5. The Los Angeles Rams are top 5 for me because you had the surprise of that rookie class that they drafted last year. Puka goes without saying what he did. Kyron Williams was overshadowed with what Puka did, but he was very, very good for them. On defense, they had some nice rookies, add a lot to their defense side of the ball, Byron Young being one of them. And they have young, exciting players, but they were just blindsided by that Aaron Donald retirement. You have to consider Matthew Stafford's age and maybe trying to find a long-term replacement for him. But I still think he's got a good amount left in the tank. I think with all their young talent and experience with McVay and Stafford, I think they're top 5 for sure in the NFC. Then number 4, I have the Green Bay Packers. Jordan Love, I was a big fan. He really surprised me with what he did last year. He looked great. He just grew and developed as every week went on. Josh Jacobs is a good addition to their offense. A lot of young wide receivers that made their impact as well. Their offensive line played better than most people give them credit. They just have, that youth factor. Having played in playoff games, they impressed last season, but trying to get back there year after year is tougher than a lot of people may think. So that's something they have to maneuver around with with Jordan Love. But I think the potential's there. They've shown flashes competing with the 49ers. I think they're only going to get better, honestly. Arguably the best team in the NFC North. That's something to monitor, but I love what they did. They're number 4 for me. Top 3, I have the Eagles as the 3rd best team. The only reason why, because defensively you saw how bad they were, how much they struggled in that secondary. Pass rusher was an issue. We talked about that in the first segment, how they only have 2 starters, and then the depth behind that is a little questionable. Their offense is otherworldly. It's probably the best offense in the league, but, they have to try and stop the other team from scoring. That give and get from their offense and defense is going to be huge for them. When the offense has off days, can the defense stop somebody when they're going up against the Lions, the Packers? That's yet to be seen. So for me, defense, they have to improve. Maybe they'll jump into top 2 or best team, but right now I have them sitting at number 3. At number 2, I have the Detroit Lions. To me, the best offensive line in the NFL. They were able to keep both of their coordinators, Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn, which is huge for them because they were young on both sides of the ball. Keeping them for another year is big to build that chemistry, build that reputation on both sides of the ball. They had a great rookie class. Need to figure out the contract situation with Amon-Ra St. Brown. I think it's the best situation right now, trending in the best direction out of any wide receiver. I expect it to get done. They just need secondary help with the whole Cam Sutton situation going on. It takes away one more body from that secondary and safety after they lost CJ. If they address those 2 spots, they're really going to be pushing the number 1 team, which still remains the San Francisco 49ers. They have the best overall team. Coaching, scheme, McCaffrey, Debo, it goes without saying, really. I expect them to still be in number 1 seed next year, repeat what they did this year. They have to get over the hump and try to win a Super Bowl with this team. They can't just waste all this talent that they have without winning a Super Bowl. But right now, they still sit as the best team in the NFC East for me in my power rankings. That's the NFC side of things. I'm going to go to a quick break right now. In the other side, I'm going to talk about the AFC and how that all broke down in my power rankings. So that's coming up after this break. You're not going to want to miss it on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Thank you for joining me for this last segment of the show. I'm going to get right into it, the AFC power rankings of the overall rankings that I had going in today's live show. AFC side of things, I think it was easier than the NFC for the last couple of teams that I had. 16, the Denver Broncos, right now it's not looking good. Their situation, quarterback, lack of talent everywhere else on that offensive side of the ball. Not going great right now for the Broncos. Don't sit well in the draft. I have them as the worst team in the AFC. The Patriots sit in a similar spot. No quarterback really lack of talent everywhere else. They sit at number 3, but even still, I think there's a long-term project for them. They were 4-13 last year. They have potential to improve, but still not too much to jump up too many spots in these rankings. I have them at 15, and at 14, I have the Los Angeles Chargers. Even though I love the addition of Jim Harbaugh, deciding to keep Bosa and Khalil Mack, I think was the best thing for them, but you lost a lot on the offensive side of the ball. All of Justin Herbert's targets, reliable weapons are now gone, so you have to do something to replenish that. Are you going to get it all back right away? Probably not. In a tough division with the Chiefs, the Raiders, who are trending upward as well, I don't think it's really we're not going to see a major improvement with them in terms of record. So I have them at number 14. At number 13, I have the Indianapolis Colts. A lot of these teams sit in similar spots. The Colts at least have a guy that they think could be their franchise guy, Anthony Richardson. And I say only maybe, and I think because he suffered a lot with concussions his first year. He was in and out of the team. Gardner Minshew started the majority of it, so he didn't miss his rookie season, but he could have gotten a lot more out of it. Obviously, you can't control injuries, so that's very unfortunate. So they still have to see that development play out, and it could take another year or two before they're really, really competing with an exciting young team. They were able to keep Michael Pittman, which is great. But for right now, I think they're still in a development phase with their team. So I have them at 13. Number 12 is the Las Vegas Raiders. I mentioned them. They're trending upwards. I love Christian Wilkins signing with them to pair up with Mason Crosby or Max Crosby. Devontae Adams is still there. Jacoby Myers was a great addition to them in free agency last season. So that's another team where they have the pieces, but you just have to figure out all the other little things like safety, defensive back, linebacker, other weapons other than Devontae Adams when he gets double teamed, stuff like that. Running back too after losing Josh Jacobs. Those question marks, and seeing how Antonio Pierce deals with the first season of him being the full head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. I like what they did, but, there's still some gray areas in some of the spots on their roster. I don't think 12 is bad for them, considering where they were a whole offseason ago. That's where I have them ranked. At number 11, I have the Tennessee Titans, another team that I just loved what they did, really changing their identity and scheme this offseason with bringing in Brian Callahan from the Cincinnati Bengals. Calvin Ridley is a big addition, but an expensive one because of his age, and $100 million for him at this point. How much more are you going to get out of him? It's better than what you had last season, but people will still question the amount of money you put into Calvin Ridley. They had some new offensive line pieces. Lloyd Cushenberry coming over from the Denver Broncos to be their new center. L'Jarius Sneed, obviously a huge trade for them to help that defensive side of the ball. To have another star on that side of the ball with Jeffrey Simmons. They added Kenneth Murray to replace Azeez Al-Shaair. It's looking better for the Tennessee Titans from where they were last year. I think the biggest thing, like I mentioned, is the scheme and modernizing this team for Will Levis to succeed. Having Tony Pollard succeed potentially more in a spread offense where there's going to be more space for him to run behind that offensive line. I like it, but big question still with a new head coach, Calvin Ridley, how much are you going to get out of him? Will Levis, it's important to see how his development goes. So I think 11 is very good for the Tennessee Titans. In just one offseason, just outside the top 10, in an AFC that's super competitive, I think they're trending in the right direction. They're on the right path. Now getting into the top 10, another AFC South team, the Jacksonville Jaguars, added great players to their team. Darnell Savage, Eric Armstead, Mitch Morse, Gabe Davis had a great start. Then they lost Calvin Ridley, so you have to try and replace that at some point, most likely through the draft. If they get, I'm pretty sure they have 16 or the 15th pick in this draft. So they're in that range where, you might consider it a reach for a wide receiver like Brian Thomas, Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell at that spot. they are candidates to trade back. I think that's not being talked about as much if they really want a receiver. So that's something to keep an eye on. But they have good players on their team. Obviously, Trevor Lawrence, you have your franchise quarterback. The only thing about them is that they have a sour taste in their mouth after the way last season ended. I think they lost 5 out of their last 6 games. They missed the playoffs entirely for a team that started off very good under Doug Peterson. And to end in that way, it leaves you with serious doubts, plus the loss of Calvin Ridley. They sit in a weird spot right now, but top 10, I think they have potential to improve on this and have a solid season if they figure out wide receiver, defensive back, secondary, stuff like that. They could be trending upwards as well. Number 9, I have the New York Jets, just because I've praised them at the start of this episode. Great additions, ready to win now. Finally have some help for Aaron Rodgers. Great weapons. Defense is looking even better than it did last year when they were still very good. But its health is the biggest issue. Health of this team. They are a little bit older. Aaron Rodgers, how's he going to look after the Achilles injury? Mike Williams hasn't struggled a lot with injuries, but they've still popped up here or there. Morgan Moses is older. Tyron Smith is older. They're great players, but they have to still monitor that health. And that will be really what makes or breaks this team. If they miss an extended period of time, unfortunately, hopefully not, this team could really just end up as they were last year, regretting and feeling bad for themselves because of how unlucky they are with injuries. So that's the biggest thing. If it all goes great and they're really lucky to have everybody healthy, they're going to be up there with the contenders, I think, because of who Aaron Rodgers is. But I can't put them too far because that injury risk is still very serious. At number 8, I have the Pittsburgh Steelers. And another team that just continues to be slept on. They have great additions in Justin Fields. Russell Wilson is both of them are better than what they had last year. So already I don't know how you think they could get worse than what they were last year. And they finished 10-7 last year and made the playoffs with everything that they had to deal with. It just shows the amount of good players that they have on this roster. If they have managed to figure out the quarterback situation, and Arthur Smith gives you more than what Matt Canada did, and after they fired Matt Canada, the better production that you can get out of them, the potential, I think 10-7 could just be the floor for this team and how well that they could play. And obviously it also has to work out. They need a new wide receiver after they traded Deontay Johnson. They have interest in Tyler Boyd, but they're still sitting in a spot where they're ultimately better than what they were last year at this point. And to make the playoffs last year and be for about a quarter and a half, 6 minutes, they were in that game with the Buffalo Bills. If they have Justin Fields, Russell Wilson in that game, Patrick Queen in that game, I think it could have maybe worked out a different way. I'm not saying the Bills would have lost, but it would have been definitely a lot closer for longer in that game. So the Steelers continue to be slept on. I have them at number 8, though. I don't think that's too crazy, too high for them. I think most people would agree with that ranking. Number 7, I can't put the Steelers over the Bills because the Bills beat them last year. Josh Allen keeps them in contention status. They've lost a lot of players, like I mentioned before, locker room guys, leaders in that building. So that's going to be huge. I don't care what anybody says. That's going to make an impact. How they're going to change their identity, maybe run the ball a little bit more with the lack of weapons that they have on offense, is something to watch. Their window is definitely closing in an AFC where a lot of teams don't stay competitive for that long and not get results. So that's something to monitor. But like I mentioned, Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, you're going to get a good chance at the playoffs and winning a lot of games. So that's them. At number 6, I have the Cleveland Browns, arguably the best defense in the league. Jerry Jeudy, they brought in to help complement Amari Cooper. Deshaun Watson is still there. You don't want to give up on Deshaun Watson, not just because of the money you're paying him, $230 million, but because he has still shown flashes of the talent that he possesses. You don't want to just give up on a guy like that. Nick Chubb had that bad injury last year, but when he is in the game healthy, probably one of the top 2 to 3 best running backs in the game in terms of production that he gives you and how unstoppable they look, quite honestly, when he's running the ball and they have play action off of that and stuff like that. David Njoku took a big jump this past year. I think they have all the pieces already there. Quarterback just still remains that big question for me because Deshaun has shown good plays and good actions, but he also has shown bad plays and bad reads and has just been injured as well a lot. So you want to be out there on the field. And I think overall, number 6 for them is a spot where they can improve upon definitely if Deshaun shows up. But because of that question mark, they can't crack the top 5 for me, which brings me to number 5, the Miami Dolphins. Offensively, they're up there with any team in the league. Maybe the best offense in the league. Another year together, I think is going to do them a lot of good. Tua still remains the question how well he performs in the playoffs in cold weather. It sounds silly to think about, but playing in Miami all those years and then being shocked by the cold and in these other environments where you're not just used to it, it does take a toll on you, but they added good players regardless in free agency. Shaq Barrett, Jordan Poyer, Anthony Walker, Jordan Brooks, to replace some of those guys that they lost on defense. They've gotten better. You just need to see a convincing performance from Tua and this Miami Dolphins team. And if you get a couple of those, they could be up there pushing top 3 for sure in my estimation. But number 4 is the Cincinnati Bengals, Joe Burrow. When he's healthy, probably the second best quarterback in the AFC, competing for that spot with Lamar Jackson. I think the Cincinnati team missed out on a big opportunity last year because Joe Burrow got hurt, killing any serious contention that they had in the AFC. They could still have T. Higgins and Jamar Chase for one more year, so you want to get the most out of them this coming year. So that's something to watch and see if they really fulfill the whole potential that this team has. The loss of Joe Mixon does hurt, and that running game, you don't want to have Joe Burrow dropping back a lot more than he did last year and maybe getting hit a few more times than he did last year. You want to avoid that at all costs and seeing him get hit and potentially hurt. But they added Trent Brown to fill in that other offensive tackle role. So they've had a decent offseason, but I would like to see them add more defensively, maybe more on the offensive line or wide receiver if they end up losing T. Higgins. But right now they sit at number 4 because Joe Burrow just makes that much of a difference for them. And now rounding out the top 3 in the AFC, the Houston Texans are top 3 for me because they were in a game with the Baltimore Ravens, showed a lot of exciting plays. C.J. Stroud goes without saying, one of the best rookie quarterback seasons in the NFL ever, potentially. Nico Collins looked great. Tank Dell looked great as a rookie. Adding Joe Mixon as well will make the running game better. Defensively, they added Danielle Hunter, the development of Christian Harris, and Will Anderson. That's huge for them. DeMeco Ryans is a defensive guy, so I'm sure he's going to have that defense as good as any, at least in his division and in the conference potentially overall. I'm really liking the Houston Texans this year. C.J. Stroud, finding that diamond in the rough like they did with C.J. Stroud is huge for them and just changes the whole dynamic of their team and the whole trajectory of where this Houston Texans team was going before he got there. I'm a big fan of them. I think they really have a great chance to compete in the AFC this year. But number 2 still remains the Baltimore Ravens for me. Lamar and Derrick Henry is going to be scary for any team that has to face that. Still have good players on defense. They were able to keep Justin Madubuike, Marlon Humphrey still there, Roquan Smith, probably the second best linebacker in the league. They have good players, but they still lost Geno Stone. 3 of their offensive line starters are now gone, so they have to definitely address that. Wide receiver still remains an issue for them. Zay Flowers was a good find, but Odell Beckham's gone. You don't really know what you're going to get out of Rashad Bateman. Mark Andrews is great. You want to get more out of Isaiah Likely, I think. But you still need that wide receiver to complement Zay Flowers and all those weapons. Again, offensive line is huge for a team that always likes to run the ball. That remains the biggest problem with them. But they still have a solid foundation with Lamar and John Harbaugh and everything that they represent. So that means, undoubtedly, the number one team is the Kansas City Chiefs. They just won the Super Bowl with probably the worst team Patrick Mahomes has had in his career in Kansas City. So they only got better, added more wide receiver talent. They're going to add more throughout the draft. They were able to keep Chris Jones. They lost L'Jarius Sneed, but they still have Trent McDuffie there, who I think is ready to assume that cornerback one role that they have on their team. They're only going to get better, and it's scary because they're on the brink of making history, repeating consecutive back-to-back Super Bowls, the first time in NFL history to do that. They have as good a chance as any team has ever had because of Patrick Mahomes. He goes without saying. Travis Kelce have a great running game with Pacheco. I just struggle to find a glaring weakness in this team right now as it stands. They've only gotten better, and they're still going to be the Chiefs. We're still going to see them in the playoffs. We could see some history next February if they make it to that game. I'm definitely not betting against them. So they remain the top team in the AFC and probably in the entire NFL. So that's my power rankings list. I would love to know what you guys think in the comments or in the chat box as well during these live shows. Let me know what you guys think of it. If you hated it, you liked it, you disagree, and want to tell me why you disagree, I want to hear it all down in the comments section below. But that will end today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in again. Please remember, as always, to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Make sure to also follow the network on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X for more of the content outside of sports as well. If you want to see more of me and this show, go on YouTube to GSMC Sports Network and the Podcast Network channel for YouTube shorts that are posted daily. All the live, full recorded shows are on there. If you want to go back and watch a full show, they're all on both of those channels, as well as individual segment videos from the live shows. In case you missed a certain segment or want to go watch it again, you don't have to watch the whole show. You can go watch each individual segment video on both of those channels as well. Remember to tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL and football conversations and discussions and more topics with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thank you guys again for tuning in. I hope to see you guys all tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn.